Hello and welcome to our talk today, talking about seagrass as the new frontier in carbon credits. I'm really excited to introduce a really excellent panel of guests today. And the panelists are bringing in experience and case studies from across the world, from Turkey, Madagascar, Kenya, and here in the UK. So first off, I'd like to introduce Yasmin Ulusoy from AKD in Turkey. She will be talking first. She'll be followed by Leah Glass from Blue Ventures, talking about work in Madagascar. She'll be followed by Dr. Jacqueline Uku from Chemfree, and she'll be talking about Kenyan seagrasses. And then finally, we'll be talking to Dr. Richard Arnsworth from the UK, and he'll be talking about Project Seagrass. And so I'd just like to start today's talk with a bit of an overview about the subject we'll be talking about. I'll just quickly share my screen. So hopefully you can all see that okay. And so this session is for the COP27 Virtual Ocean Pavilion. And so this is the space for participants that aren't at COP to experience and be interacting with some of the great work that's going on around these different subjects relating to climate. And today, we really want to focus on this idea of nature-based solutions for climate change. And so these various mechanisms protecting nature are really, we're beginning to find are really essential for this fight against rising carbon dioxide and changing climate. So these can play a really important mechanism in reducing the peak at which temperatures and carbon dioxide accumulation tops out, and also then rapidly reducing them over time. So these really are an essential tool in our toolbox to help fight climate change. And the nature-based solution that we really want to focus on today is blue carbon. And so this is any vegetated system that's in the marine environment, includes things like mangroves, seagrass, which we'll be focusing on, as well as tidal marsh and more recently kelp. And so these are global systems ranging from temperate to tropical areas, very widespread, and accumulate a huge amount of carbon dioxide. So anywhere up to around 5 times as much as terrestrial systems in the case of mangroves, accumulating all that carbon in their sediments around their root systems. And so while some of these systems are quite progressed in the way that we can monitor, manage them, and then bring finance in for them, in the instance of mangroves, other areas such as seagrass are a little bit behind. And so what we'll be talking about today is these various aspects of the process that we need to improve in order to get those seagrass systems on a similar level to mangroves. So this might be in the case of identifying knowledge gaps, having demonstration projects, identifying the co-benefits, not just carbon dioxide accumulation, as well as ways that we can bring in finance for those measures. And looking at the different attributes that we need to tick off that will allow us to accumulate carbon credits. And what I wanted to focus on from my side is just making sure that those carbon credits are high quality and high integrity. And so this means making sure that communities are adequately compensated for this work and supported to allow sustainable management to continue. And to make sure that people are involved in every stage, locally led projects, and to allow the nature to thrive as well as storing carbon. And so that's my very brief whistle-stop tour through this area. And now, if I stop sharing, I'm going to pass you back over to our first speaker today. There we go. So it's my real pleasure to introduce Yasmin Ulusoy from AKD. And Yasmin's works in project development for Akdeniz in Turkey, and she'll be talking about project that's been going on for the last few years, protecting seagrass in Turkey. And this includes, to start off, a little introductory video to this work, which, fingers crossed, I'll be able to play for you. And then I'll pass over to Yasmin. So let me see if I can.
When you think about Gökova Bay, Gökova MPA, it's full of green and blue. There are vast pastures with Posidonia oceanica. Since everything is connected and the seagrass meadows are in the first step of the whole life cycle, they're ensuring, they're providing a healthy space for every species, I can say, including human.
Within the next 30 years, we lost 40% of the Posidonia oceanica in Mediterranean.
We don't have a lot of time to act.
Posidonia oceanica came out to be a miracle plant species. That's a flowering plant species underwater. They naturally grow, which is 2 centimeters at most in a year. So blue carbon is the amount of carbon stored by plants living underwater. But when we are talking about Posidonia seagrasses, they capture almost 8 kilogram carbon per square meter in their beds.
Posidonia oceanica, it's named called lung of the Mediterranean because thanks to their photosynthesis, they produce food for all marine species.
Balık şöyle, her sene bir tık geriye gidiyor. Her sene bir tık geri, her sene bir tık geri.
When we don't have these seagrass meadows, there won't be enough fish. The fishermen, they will be vulnerable because their income will decrease. The primary threat, pollution, we're anchoring over the meadows, and the climate crisis because of the increasing seawater temperatures.
Tuttuğumuz ekonomik değeri olan balık çeşitliliğinde belli bir azalma görüldü.
Azalıyoruz bilmiyorum. Böyle gidişle 10 sene sonra balık da bulamayız.
So we started from scratch. After we established designating no fishing zones, today we call them fully protected areas.
Gün doğumuyla birlikte denize çıkıyorum çünkü balıkçılık faaliyetleri bu saatlerde çok daha fazla yapılıyor. Müdahalede bulunuyoruz, insanları uyarıyoruz. Daha çok burası yasak.
We're doing visual census research, and we can see the biomass in our project areas are increasing, and we can have some concrete results that we can show the people that patrolling and tackling illegal fishing activities, it works. The local communities, this is where they are living, and they have the opportunities and threats. They have the strengths and weaknesses, so they need to be in, they need to have the ownership.
Hiç kimse balığın bitmesini istemiyor. Çünkü birçok balıkçının bildiği tek iş bu. Hayatta başka bir B planı yok.
I am so much optimistic about this part of the world. I believe in next 10 years we will replicate this all around the Turkey.
Thank you, Dan. I'll just go straight into sharing my screen. Okay, hello everyone. We just watched a great video shot recently by Lori and FFI in our project area of Gökova Bay. It's the perfect overview of what we do, but I will give a little bit more information on how, as a marine conservation NGO, we are trying to build capacity in understanding blue carbon ecosystems in Turkey. So quick overview of who we are. We are a national NGO founded in 2012. Our projects address several key challenges facing the Turkish coastline, including developing no fishing zones and systems of community rangers, restoring marine habitats within MPAs, protecting endangered species like the Mediterranean monk seal and sandbar shark, tackling the issue of invasive species and supporting coastal communities such as small-scale coastal fishers. We operate across 600 kilometers of coastline between Gökova Bay and Kaş and run some or all of our projects in Gökova, Fethiye Göcek, Datça Bozburun, and Kaş Gökova special environmental protection areas. So what do we know about seagrass ecosystems? Seagrasses are flowering plants that grow only in marine environments and form extensive underwater meadows. They are categorized into 4 families, and they are among the most valuable coastal ecosystems on the planet. There are 5 species of seagrass that populate the Mediterranean, and Posidonia oceanica is endemic to the Med. It has wide distribution and is considered one of the most important species of seagrass in the region. PO grows within a temperature range of 10 to 30 degrees Celsius, and temperature is considered a central parameter controlling geographical distribution. It's a slow-growing species and is organized in roots, rhizomes, and leaves. Under favorable conditions, PO forms extensive meadows from the surface to approximately 40 meters depth, and it covers about 1.5% of the total Mediterranean sea surface. PO meadows have various direct and indirect benefits to the marine ecosystem and connected livelihoods. They host about 25% of all species living in the Mediterranean. Their leaves increase available area for sessile species and support the production of organic material. They provide breeding, feeding, and shelter for numerous animal species. PO supports carbon sequestration into the seabed. They protect the coastline from erosion through seabed consolidation and mediate wave motion. PO is also known as the lung of the Mediterranean, as it can emit up to 20 L of oxygen per day per square meter of meadows. And human interaction with PO dates back hundreds of years. There are records of numerous traditional uses in commercial and industrial sectors, such as footwear and even paper production. So more recently, PO became a focus in the protection and management of the Mediterranean marine ecosystem and was included in the European Union's Habitat Directive among the habitats of priority interest. It's also protected under the Berne and the Barcelona Conventions. Bottom trawling is forbidden on meadows, and Turkey has its own national legislation to protect PO under the Professional and Recreational Fisheries Circulars. PO meadows are fragile ecosystems with recovery times of hundreds of years, and they are experiencing a global decline. Some general threats include nutrient and sediment pollution, physical modification, the introduction of non-native species, and the general impacts of climate change, such as warming seawater temperatures and acidification. On the Turkish coast, the greatest damage is caused by anchoring of boats, grazing by invasive herbivores like rabbitfish and sea urchins, increasing seawater temperatures and acidification. In our project sites, we've witnessed seawater temperatures increasing from 14-15 degrees to 16-17 degrees in the winter season in just like the last 10 years. Generally, threats are heightened for seagrass species in the Med, as it's a semi-enclosed basin with increasing human pressure and where the impacts of climate change are witnessed at faster rates. So our efforts in learning more about Posidonia started with the Merces project in 2016. We carried out restoration trials on Posidonia oceanica and Cimodocea nodosa seagrass meadows and the Pinna nobilis. Trials ran for about 3 years in Gökova and Foça special environmental protected areas. We found that PO transplantation was more successful in cage settings, where there was also lower pressure created by herbivores, and there was also higher replantation success with Cynodocea nodosa, but in general, replantation success of these species was quite low. Because of this, we're focused on protection rather than transplantation, and we're continuing monitoring work since 2019 with the support of the Endangered Landscapes Program. We aim to identify the state of PO meadows, main threats to the ecosystem, and develop a set of actions for conservation. As we increase knowledge of these ecosystems in Turkey, we are better able to advocate for different loss mitigation measures nationally, such as seagrass-friendly mooring systems. We've worked with UNEP WCMC in the mapping of meadows. Our team in Turkey verified remote sensing data across 766 kilometers between Gökova Bay and the Cape of Gelidonia. We do our monitoring work now in 3 regions and 9 stations in and outside of marine protected areas. Monitoring comprises regular checks to measure coverage, density, the effects of anchoring, and more. We will now be monitoring every 6 months instead of once a year, because there is an acceleration in the rate of change in conditions in our area. So here's a map showing the locations of our monitoring stations across southwestern Turkey. And most recently, we collaborated with FFI and Bangor University on blue carbon sampling and analysis to address a gap in knowledge around carbon stocks in Turkish seagrass meadows. Our team undertook sampling of approximately 700 core samples. The samples were dried at Ege University in Turkey and then subsequently transported to Bangor for analysis. We don't have the results yet, but we hope that when they come, the study can be used to advocate for protection measures and potentially finance conservation work in these ecosystems. So what's next? We still have a lot to learn, and we do need to learn it fast. We're lucky in the sense that there are high quality projects around the world to learn from, and we will be listening to some of them on this panel. Thank you for listening and taking an interest in seagrass ecosystems. I've left some of our contacts. Please feel free to reach out. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jasmine. It's a really interesting project, and it's still, it still really impresses me. 700 core samples for carbon is really a mammoth effort. So yeah, a great project. If I can remind everyone to put any questions in the Q&A box, and we can address those at the end of the panelists speaking. But now I'd like to introduce Leah Glass from Blue Ventures. She's a technical specialist working on mangroves and blue carbon. And I'll pass over to you, Leah.
Yeah, hi everybody. Really honoured to be part of this panel, and thanks Dan, the rest of the team at FFI for the invitation. So my name's Leah, and for the last decade, together with Blue Ventures, I've been working with small-scale fishers here in Madagascar, where I am right now, to develop blue carbon projects. So today, really excited to share some of the thoughts and lessons learned related to the intersection of seagrass, blue carbon, and also LMMAs, locally managed marine areas. Next slide, please, Dan. So who are Blue Ventures? On this slide, you can see our mission. But yeah, we're really all about it. We believe that ocean recovery starts with people. So very similar to the previous video, we believe that we need to put fishers first, and we do that by supporting them with whatever they may need to manage and protect their seas and oceans for the benefit of people and also for nature. Next slide, please. Regarding seagrasses, well, we work across the tropics, and related to seagrasses, we, together with Project Seagrass, with Rich and Seagrass Watch as well, and also local partners, we support locally led seagrass monitoring and management in Thailand, Indonesia, and Timor-Leste. But today, I'm going to be focusing on some of the seagrass work and blue carbon work that we've supported in southwest Madagascar, which is where this beautiful photo was taken by my colleague, Gar. Next slide, please. So in southwest Madagascar, Blue Ventures, we work predominantly with 3 locally managed marine areas, or LMMAs. These LMMAs, they stretch from the mangroves on the coastline to the adjacent seagrass beds, and they also obviously incorporate the really important coral reefs within the region. Our work in the region has spanned coming up to 2 decades now. But for the first half of this talk, I really want to focus on the participatory mapping and ecological monitoring activities that we've supported that has informed the development of seagrass management within the region. Next slide, please. So with the 3 LMMAs, BV, we've supported fishers to conduct participatory mapping, working out what's going on where and what is where, as well as training local monitors in basic marine biology, benthic fish and mobile invertebrates identification, and ecological monitoring methodologies, like you can see from the photo on the slide here. And there's also an important component of basic data analysis for ecological data and how to present this to family and friends back in the village. Next slide, please. So for us, this journey, it's really highlighted the importance of engaging fishers directly in mapping and monitoring marine resources by providing them with the tools and the space to collect data, analyze data, and present it back to their peers. We've seen a real change in the management, and this is the locally led ecological monitoring has really strengthened community governance by ensuring that decision-making and governance discussions, they're based on what's actually happening in the water. Next slide, please. So one example of this, it's certainly not been all rainbows and unicorns, but yeah, one example is that charged with the information provided by the mapping and monitoring, the villages across the 3 LMMAs have now zoned 21 hectares of seagrass areas as no-take zones, which is really quite exciting. And the ecological monitoring has informed how these areas are changing. And of course, over the first 12 months following the closure of one of the areas, we've seen the communities have seen fish abundance increase by almost 2 orders of magnitude, which is really exciting. Next slide, please. What does have all this got to do with blue carbon, I guess? Well, I think the important thing to note is, in theory, any management of a blue carbon ecosystem, whether that be a mangrove or a seagrass, that is having a net positive impact on the ecosystem, is de facto a blue carbon project, because that management is having a positive impact on the carbon stocks within these systems. However, turning this management into a project that can earn revenue from climate finance is a bigger task, and that was touched on a little bit by Dan's introduction. The most common way for projects to earn climate finance is to measure and monitor the carbon impact of the blue carbon conservation or restoration, and then use a carbon standard to certify and to quantify and certify this impact. Following certification, projects can sell carbon credits, and the funds from these sales can, for instance, help support the local management, livelihoods, and also in some places well-being, which is the potential is there. So over the last decade, next slide, please, Dan, sorry. Together with the villages within one of the LOMAs that we're working with in Southwest Madagascar, Blue Ventures has supported the development of the Tahiri Hunku Mangrove Carbon Project. It covers about 1,300 hectares of mangroves, and it was certified by the Plan Vivo, under the Plan Vivo standard in 2019. The communities that took part have defined a benefit sharing scenario in which 50% of the income from carbon credit sales goes to the partner villages for things like education or social infrastructure. 23% goes to the management association that is responsible for managing the entire LMMA. So the income also contributes towards the cost of fisheries management and other activities within the broader LMMA. And then 27% goes to the national government according to their carbon legislation. So the association that manages the LMMA is the leader of the project. Blue Ventures' role is related to technical support, particularly during project setup and monitoring and reporting. And it's also our responsibility to sell the carbon credits to suitable buyers. And this is really where some of the challenges are coming in. This sounds really fantastic in theory, and it's a really exciting project, which we've really seen a lot of potential for on the ground. But currently, due to stalled legislation, we're currently unable to sell carbon credits from this project, meaning that Blue Ventures has had to financially backstop the project to ensure its ongoing success. Hopefully these are only temporary, and we're kind of certainly working really hard with the Management Association to overcome these barriers. But they're largely due to the fact that mangroves are incorporated in Madagascar's National REDD+ framework. So any delays or complications in this fairly complex and politicized framework leads to delays in the flow of finance. It's also slightly complicated as well by the fact that the national governance of mangroves is split between the forestry ministries and the fisheries ministries, which has the potential to further complicate implementation. Moving to seagrasses, it's quite exciting for us in the communities, because we've obviously seen this, and we know that a lot of these challenges are linked to the fact that mangroves are deemed in some way forest as well as ocean, and seagrasses are very much marine, and thus outside of these REDD and forestry frameworks. So in theory, the policy pathways for seagrass blue carbon projects in Madagascar should be less complicated. Next slide, please. But we've really learned from our experience, and Tahiri Hunku remains a really exciting project that's got strong support, both particularly from an investment perspective and also on the ground. But we work with fishers. And to these people, the financial and cultural benefits of the fisheries associated with blue carbon ecosystems, they really tend to far outweigh any benefit from carbon. So hence with the seagrasses, we've really, we kind of learned from our experiences, and our starting point has been this ecological monitoring and fisheries management, and putting aside any potential future carbon income while we work through the challenges, the political barriers associated with Tahiri Hunku. So on the last slide, thanks Dan, just really summarize some of the lessons that we've learned over the last few years, a lot of which I've already touched on. But yeah, blue carbon ecosystems, you know, they're intrinsically linked, both socially and ecologically. And I think, you know, as shown in the previous talk as well, you know, they shouldn't be managed in isolation, and they're part of a living, breathing ocean ecosystem. And blue carbon finance has the potential to cover all carbon-rich ecosystems along our coastline, such as mangroves and seagrasses, has the potential to support this integrated management. And we here at Blue Ventures remain really excited about this potential. Related to the ecological monitoring, you know, effective, transparent monitoring is very much the foundation of both successful local management and also carbon projects. They really underpin kind of like that monitoring, evaluation, and learning cycle really kind of underpins everything. And when the people that are using these resources have the tools and the agency to lead this monitoring, it definitely, you know, helps to ensure the success of projects. And really, the last thing to touch on is, you know, is this trust piece. And trust is the foundation of natural resource management. In closing these no-take zones, these seagrass no-take zones, the villages in southwest Madagascar, they put trust in each other to abide by the rules that they've put in place, and, you know, ease the use of resources within these no-take zones. And, you know, if this were to be scaled up to a carbon project level, you know, those no-take zones would need to be increased. And for that trust to kind of like continue, climate, you know, this is one thing we've learned with Tahiri Hunku is, you know, climate finance must, you know, be delivered equitably and in a timely manner for trust to ensure. And currently, you know, that's ongoing in Tahiri Hunku, and we really hope that the political barriers will be broken and the system can work as it's supposed to. And yeah, just really to reiterate that the kind of policies, both national and also at a local level, need to support this equitable and timely flow of climate finance. That's it from me. Please feel free to put any questions in the box on the last slide. Thanks, Dan. You can see my contact details, and obviously a lot of this work has been due to the amazing work of the fishes we work with are my colleagues, so I will direct questions to my colleagues if I can't answer them myself.
Thanks so much, Leah. Really exciting work, and really great to see the projects in action on the ground and established, and really excited to see what happens with the seagrass. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jacqueline Uku from Chemfree in Kenya. And she's a senior research scientist and coordinator there. And Jacqueline, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me and see the slides. I'm really glad to be coming after Leah, because I think a lot of the things that are happening in Madagascar really reflect what is happening in Kenya. I'll start by just sharing our national framework for seagrass research. A few years back, we recognized that we didn't quite have a plan, a scientific plan and a management plan for coral reef and seagrass research. And so we developed an ecosystems conservation strategy. It expired in 2018, but we still continue to use it as we consider its update. And its goal was to help us really focus on these two ecosystems in terms of preservation, conservation, restoration, improved research and management partnership. And I think this was really key for seagrasses. As has been said by other speakers, seagrasses tend to disappear. We have a very small community of scientists working in the area because greater focus is given to mangroves, greater focus is given to coral reefs, which are very charismatic in our region and bring top-notch, I think, tourism financing into our economies. So seagrasses have remained hidden, though they're really critical for fisheries, and we see the threats everywhere: pollution, destructive fishing practices, anchor damage, habitat alteration, and obviously poor governance. And so when we got an opportunity to focus a bit deeper on seagrass blue carbon work, we took it, I think, with open hands and a great deal of excitement, because it meant then we would have an opportunity to put seagrass work on a different platform, just moving it from diversity studies, maybe some restoration work, to a different, global platform. We received support through the Wildlife Conservation Society from BNCFF and BAF. And we are focusing in the south coast of Kenya, and we are working to incorporate seagrasses into a Vanga Blue Forest carbon credit system. We've made great advances in Kenya when it comes to mangroves, the Mikoko Pamoja project, the Vanga Blue Forest project, world renowned, and already attracting carbon benefits to communities where they benefit. And our strategy was to explore the bundling of seagrasses into these already established processes. And so we have been working to understand community values and uses of seagrasses, understanding the biodiversity in this region, understanding the carbon stocks, and then also finally recognizing that we do have to have closures for it to make sense, working with communities to explore issues of closures. As I've mentioned, these areas are vast fishing zones, and so communities have a hard time giving up space to be able to close the regions that as required. This is also part of a bigger project, and I think it's important to highlight that we are focused really on the seagrass part in the south coast of Kenya, but it extends towards Tanzania, where we are part of a transboundary conservation area initiative, where we are interested in creating eventually a governance structure around this very rich and pristine region, both in mangrove, seagrasses, and coral reefs. So we focus specifically in activities in 3 villages, Banga, Jimbo, and Mukwiro. And as scientists, we went in mapping seagrass distribution and resource use patterns in this region, training communities on blue carbon, so translating the science into community and having community dialogues around the science. And carbon science is not an easy science. So you have to have discussions in Kiswahili and local dialects to be able to help them understand what benefits would come into this. Our job was made slightly easier because they have touched the benefits from mangrove closures and mangrove blue carbon. And so I think there was a high level of receptivity for us. We had communities join us, and we've trained young people to help us in carbon assessment work, and we hope to continue having them involved in this work even as we move into closures and monitoring. So I'll move on very quickly into some of the lessons learned. We have 12 species, unlike I think Turkey and a lot of the Mediterranean. We have a multitude of species. Which species would we do closures around? I think that has been one of the bigger considerations and questions for us, because the climax species from the preliminary data that we have seem to hold a lot more carbon within the rooting systems and in the sediment. But we still know that pioneer species play a critical role in restoration. They come in even as we have worked in restoration work, especially after degradation. So looking at the entirety of these species, rather than being very selective, I think has been one of the things we've been working around. We've also learned, like my Madagascan colleague, that we cannot leave out communities. These are their fishing grounds. This is the heart of their livelihoods. And so we've had to have significant dialogue and consultations where scientific findings are critical. They want to know the science. You would be surprised, but the communities are very critical and they want to know the science behind the things that the scientists are telling them. We've also learned that through the process, we've embedded government agencies. We've had Kenya Wildlife Service that deal with marine parks. We've had the Kenya Forestry Service that deals with the forests, and mangroves fall under them. And so we found that we have governance frameworks for closures, both mangrove and reflected in the seagrasses through the beach management unit and fisheries sector policies. And we've also found that that decisions have to be based on community feedback. They demand for it. We cannot make the decisions on our own as scientists and in the lab, in the office. We really have to have decision making and consensus building. And this has been quite a journey. We've recently, in the month of September, obtained signed intention from communities to take up closures in specific areas once they understood the science. And I think for us, that has been great progress. But as we move forward, we do recognize the need for further research to inform seagrass management policies. We do not have seagrasses incorporated specifically in our NDCs and climate action plans, make very minimum mention of seagrasses. We believe this will be opportunities for inclusion for our nationally determined contributions. we are very keen on continuing the mapping of change if we have closures. What will change specifically? What is the fisheries value? What are the community perceptions? This is work we'll continue with. And then also making sure that we still continue to get community buy-in, community inclusion, and community, I think, growing greater interest among communities in this region to be able to continue with follow-on work. We recognize that this is not something that will happen in a day. We need constant follow-up, constant presence in these communities, and constant support to be able to help them police the areas that they have indicated that and have committed to closing. So I'll stop there. I think that was my last slide, but these are just some of the wider lessons we've learned. And we're looking forward to sharing more and more as we learn even more beyond just this process of initiating the work. So I'm very thankful to FFI for the invitation, and I look forward to engaging, I think, in the future with all the panelists. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jacqueline. It's really, really interesting stuff, and really great to see such strong community engagement with the seagrass issues and connections to the government. Really essential stuff. Finally, I'd like to introduce Dr. Richard Unsworth from Project Seagrass. He's a co-founder of Project Seagrass that's based in the UK. And a associate professor at Swansea University. So Richard, I'll pass over to you.
Good morning from West Wales, and thanks for having me this morning. Basically, I'm going to give you a very brief 10-minute overview of some of the challenges that's in Wales that we've encountered in the conservation and restoration of seagrasses, because ultimately, if you want to create some level of carbon credits, you basically need to create an action that reverses loss or degradation and secures an active carbon sink into the future. And this work, I guess, is based on. Oh, hang on, why is this not? Oh no. Yeah, I guess this work is based on many projects that we've run over in West Wales over the last decade, and within that period, the thinking around carbon has only come into restoration in the last 5 years, really. And the bigger picture here is that the whole seascape is degraded in large parts of Western Europe, where I'm based, and that rings true for many parts of the world. And it's seagrass restoration has a lot of potential to be pushed forward, and conservation pushed forward by carbon. But it's basically about bringing the seascape back. It's about recarbonizing that seascape for the benefit of not just carbon and creating unintended consequences, but actually bringing life back to that ocean to fight the numerous global challenges that we as humanity face. Now, conserving or restoring seagrasses isn't just about some either carbon or fluffy species ideal. It's about a far more broader perspective on how we think about our oceans and the services that it actually can provide. Now, not every seagrass meadow provides everything to humanity, and they're all different. So a meadow that we've just been hearing about in Madagascar or in East Africa It's very different to maybe a deep water meadow off the Great Barrier Reef. But at a global level, seagrass conservation and restoration may actually support up to 16 of 17 of the UN Sustainability Development Goals. And, you know, actually supporting food supply is a big part of that. Supporting community well-being, livelihoods is also a part of that. And these are things that we need to bear in mind and think about as we think about developing restoration, improving coastal biodiversity, and as this discussion is about creating carbon credits. So at a global seagrass level, we know that degradation has been massive. There's all sorts of figures that have been bandied around, which more often than not reflect our poor global understanding of where seagrass is and how it's changed over time. But the overarching picture, whatever data set you look at, is that over the last 100 years or so, we've lost a lot of seagrass, and many areas continue to be threatened, and there continues to be loss and degradation of seagrass. But from the context of climate change and where we now stand as humanity, actually we can see that as an opportunity to reverse that loss, to bring carbon back into the seascape, and with it improve diversity of animals there, improve the productivity of fisheries, enhance the filtration of our coastal water, support coastlines that are being eroded by increasing sea level rise and storminess. So there's big opportunities that actually conserving and restoring seagrass actually creates, and we need to think about it like that. In UK at the moment, we have governments who are very focused on building things. It's all about their legacy and restoration of habitats. It's like building something. So it attracts politicians' interest. It attracts corporate entities' interest, because you're actually constructing something and building something. So in the context of the UK, it's great that there's now funding going into restoration. But the bigger picture is, it's not all about restoration, and carbon credit shouldn't all be about restoration. It's about the bigger picture of conservation. And sometimes actually planting seagrass is not the only solution, or not the right, and certainly not the right solution. So the lessons that we've been learning in Wales is that, you know, we need to take different approaches. It's horses for courses. What is appropriate for your local perspective? And that's the biggest thing that we're seeing, that various groups are jumping on the interest in restoration and thinking they can plant seagrass anywhere. And we've seen this globally. We've seen it throughout the history of restoration, in that many projects fail, and that's often because due consideration isn't actually given to the intricacies of what's required to achieve restoration, and what the merits of actually conservation action relative to restoration might actually be. And in that discussion, I just want to highlight that not all solutions are expensive and complex, and we can do a lot with various levels of low technology, and we should never sort of always jump into the idea that we have to have the most advanced technological, all singing and dancing piece of kit to make something work. And something that we've been working with in the UK is a problem of boat moorings and anchoring in seagrass. And people have spent many thousands in lots of projects looking at the value of different advanced systems for mooring boats, and how that might limit damage to seagrass. And actually, what we found, if you just use common old rope, you're probably not going to damage the seagrass. So do you always need to spend thousands of pounds? Not really. And I think that sort of message is reaches across marine conservation, where we know that money is always tight, where resources are limited, and sometimes expertise is limited. And there are often simple solutions out there that are low cost. When we turn to thinking about actually the specifics of restoration isn't new. There are groups of fishermen in Japan who, over thousands of years, have been working to recover their seabed, spending a Friday morning turning over bits of habitat that they've actually degraded. And it's more recently been well recognized in big studies in the US, where there's been a lot of success over 30 years in bringing back large areas of seagrass. And there's sufficient experimental evidence on restoration that Marieke van Katwijk, a Dutch researcher, was able to run a sort of meta-analysis of all data on seagrass restoration around the world a number of years ago, and looked at success rates and how different types of projects and methods fared. So there is a really good basis to start in looking at restoration. But from what we've recognized in terms of trying to move restoration from very small scale planting to larger scale, is that there are many knowledge gaps, and that needs to be recognized in terms of pushing restoration forward. And one of the big findings that review by Marieke van Katwijk is that often seagrass is planted in the wrong place. We need to take lots of different approaches to ensure that doesn't happen. And we can do models. We can create models that relate seagrass conditions to known environmental parameters and work out where are the best places for it. But models are only part of the story, and with any model, it's poor data in, poor data out, and it's very easy to create a model, but very difficult to create a model with sufficiently high resolution data to make it ecologically valid. So you need to get out there. You need to think about whether your site has enough light, whether there's too much sedimentation, whether there's nutrient levels are appropriate. There's lots of different environmental parameters that you can go out and measure. It'll begin to tell you whether your site is actually appropriate for restoration, because planting seagrass ultimately is a lot of effort, and if it fails, then it's a big waste. So go and do your homework. Ultimately, for large-scale restoration to happen, it's not about companies or governments or organizations doing it. It's about communities ultimately, them bringing back habitats that are important for their communities, for their livelihoods, for their local benefits, and therefore projects have to work with communities, and communities have to be at the heart of those projects through strong stakeholder collaboration, co-production of knowledge, working with the stakeholders such as government and landowners. It's not sufficient just to be a biologist and think, I want to plant seagrass. And I think, naively 10 years ago, probably I thought that, yeah, that's just what you do. But it's way more complex than that. And for seagrass restoration to work, you need to think about social science. You need to think about people who understand communities. And I'm a biologist, not a social scientist, and many people who enter this work have those biological expertise rather than the stakeholder and the social elements. Ultimately, if you're going to set forth on a discussion, a project around restoration, you need to think about what your end point is, your criteria for success. Where do you actually hope to end up at the end of that project? And it's very easy to create unrealistic goals. And some of the things that we've done in the past were perhaps unrealistic, and therefore you you set yourself up for failure. So it's important to think about those things in a realistic manner. Everyone always focuses on the method, and that's probably the last thing you want to think about. Where can you actually do it? Who can you do it with whom? What is your success criterion ultimately? And then the final thing is, what is the method we're going to actually use to get to that point? But trialing it is key, because one method may not work in another place. Just because it worked in West Wales doesn't mean it may work in Scotland. And all the other bits and pieces that go with restoration, that people immediately run out and chase the seed, the plants. Those are other considerations that you need to think about, because in the UK there's been an odd scenarios where government funders have given out funding for major projects, but those projects have been prevented from collecting seed by another department of government, so they ultimately fail. So there's lots of things to think about in this space. And my biggest learning lesson is don't rush, and don't be rushed into decisions. Funders want to make decisions rapidly. Funders want to push timelines, but these are plants, this is nature. It doesn't respond to the timeline of a funder. It responds to light and temperature and wave energy. And you need to be realistic about that, and so do funders. And ultimately, you need people, resources, and the work that we've done in West Wales has been highly dependent on a lot of people getting involved with that project. And, you know, that's both a help and a hindrance sometimes, but it has bigger, wider benefits for people, their well-being, particularly as we stare a climate emergency in the face. And lastly, yeah, seagrass restoration is difficult, it's expensive, it's a roller coaster ride, but it is way more than just carbon. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Richard. Really great to see that sort of global perspective on things, and to get some lessons learned from implementation in Wales. Thanks to all the speakers for finishing bang on time. And so now we're going to have a panel discussion. I think we've got a few questions coming in. Please do add more questions if you have them to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So to start, I think the general message across all speakers is perhaps the importance of community engagement and links to government. A question from Sophie is really interested in knowing whether the Turkish government is interested or aware in blue carbon opportunities from seagrass. But I think that can be applied to perhaps all countries, looking at, I suppose, the level of government engagement in large-scale restorations in your countries, and whether they're incorporating blue carbon, for instance, in their nationally determined contributions. I think Kenya and Madagascar have been leading the way in terms of incorporating nature-based solutions in their NDCs, but perhaps you could give some lessons in terms of how you can bring in government to support these kind of projects, and the importance of engaging with them, whether they accelerate or not a project. Perhaps Yasmin, if you'd like to start, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So we know that the Turkish government is working on this, but we still have a slow progress within the country in terms of carbon markets, projects that come from Turkey, and so on. So we do work with the government and related ministries on all our projects. So as soon as we do have some data on blue carbon in seagrass ecosystems along our project areas, we would be happy to kind of collaborate with the related groups, but we also believe that a lot falls on civil society groups and businesses to kind of push forward that agenda and call for policy to create a system for us to work with as well. But I mean, I would be happy to hear from the others because I feel like they have a lot more headway in terms of this.
Yeah, perhaps Jacqueline, if you could bring in your insights. We had some very strong engagement, and similarly, Leah, it seems to be very important to engage government early with these kind of projects to get them successful.
Yeah. I think one has to be very strategic and engage government from the onset. So we've done that, but we've engaged with government on the seagrasses, I think with those that are on the ground, the managers that manage the systems. There is, I think, still need, even on our end, to raise visibility in higher levels of government. And I think one of the strategies which we're using is the piggy banking on mangroves and using them as associated systems. Of course, they're in a continuum where it's very clear to us that the nursery grounds are in the mangroves. So the kids will be found in the mangroves, the adults will be found in the seagrass beds and so on. So I think for us, the strategy has been to follow the journey that the mangrove team took, piggyback on them, and begin conversations that can raise the visibility within the governance framework that is ongoing. And then be a bit more targeted with the agencies that are working on the nationally determined contributions, so that visibility raises, you know, not just at that one level, but can really go up where it matters.
Yeah. No, I don't. Yeah, fully echo Dr. Jacqueline's points there, particularly regarding that early engagement. And I think with this ongoing, the ongoing evolution of NDCs, I think it's going to be very interesting to watch, and how it kind of like how it impacts both positively and negatively the development of smaller scale projects as countries further kind of define, particularly in these more kind of like nascent ecosystems like seagrasses. I think the seagrasses is really exciting because the concept has obviously been around for a while. The science is now building and everything, and I think there's really, like Jacqueline said, there's a lot to learn from the journey that countries and local authorities and communities have been on with carbon projects. With mangrove carbon projects, and ensure that those lessons are kind of like duplicated in learned from in seagrass ecosystems, and how, you know, NDCs obviously ensure that the carbon value, the climate value of seagrass ecosystems is established at a national and an international level, which is fantastic. But also thinking about how that, you know, how does that impact kind of like implementation and projects on the ground and their access to carbon finance, potentially through the voluntary carbon market is it's going to be an interesting few years.
Yeah, I think so. I think things are happening quite fast, and hopefully we can bring all the countries on board. And I think another question that's related to that is whether you think that to what extent government policy is holding up these kind of restoration projects. Are there any instances where they're sort of actively against these kind of large-scale approaches, or have your experiences been quite positive in terms of those kind of collaborations?
In the UK, we have devolved nations, and in the smaller governments of Wales and Scotland, there's better communication and a better capacity to discuss projects and think about the bigger picture and the concerns, the benefits, the risks, and come to a reasonable decision about how to move forward. But within England, we have a lot of a much bigger government, and where we have restrictions right, left, and centre, and we have very much one arm has not got one finger doesn't know what the other finger's doing, let alone what the other arm's doing. And that seems to be just the constant thing where someone's awarding funding and someone's preventing it, sometimes in the same government department, and it's ludicrous. And I think the state of affairs in restoration in England, and I've heard it in other countries as well. I don't know the specifics, so I don't really want to comment, but I have heard of other problems in other European countries, and also parts of Southeast Asia where you know, the sort of the response to restoration doesn't befit the emergency of biodiversity and the climate that we sit in. And you know, it's all very well to sit there and take risk-free decisions, but the fact is that we as a planet are under risk, so we need to do something about it. And ultimately that involves some risk to find solutions.
Yeah, I think linking on from that kind of question of the urgency and the scale at which we can address these issues, is one from Gildas, who's asking, how can we scale up, simplify and make accessible these kind of large-scale assessments and monitoring of seagrass, and whether these kind of approaches for seagrass will ever sort of catch up with the extent of mangrove, given mangroves are a little bit easier to collect data for. A lot of these approaches seem to be local scale first, so how do we build that up to the large scale? Yeah.
It's the age-old question of how to maximize resources when they're few and far between, and therefore communities can be part of that solution. And there are a lot of citizen science programs around the world, and those citizen science programs won't always be able to map everything and do everything, but they help inform bigger projects. They help inform other assessments. And two things that I'm personally involved with are something called Seagrass Spotter, which is a sort of an entry-level citizen science program where anyone can find a location of a seagrass, take a picture of it and upload it to a website, or do the same with a phone app. And it's a basic system, and increasingly people are using that to the data that's being created by that's open access to anyone who wants to go on the website can use it to think about where they want to map seagrass, or use it to ground truth satellite imagery, or help design another future project. So there's that level of citizen science work, and as that Seagrass Spotter isn't the only one. You know, there are lots of other projects that have done that sort of thing. But then at a sort of a higher level of citizen science, there's a sort of monitoring approach, and there's the Seagrass Watch program, where actually groups can learn a particular protocol that's very well established, that's got very good instruction to it, it's got very good materials to it, and that community can begin to learn how to monitoring the long-term condition of their seagrass. Sometimes that's in collaboration with local scientists. Sometimes it's just because some communities have done their reading and they've done the homework and they're able to do it. But you know, there are different tiers where communities can get involved at different levels, and you know, there's other examples of that, of other groups doing those sorts of things. But those are two kind of examples where people can get involved and be empowered to learn about where their seagrass is, what state is it in, and what are the reasons that meadow are important.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, and I think that it is important to bring in local collaboration, whether it's, you know, it may just be community engagement in terms of collecting that on the ground data where you can't get it from remote sensing in those deeper areas. And I think, Dr. Jacqueline, there's a small question on this one, focused on Kenya. And it's good to see a lot of baseline studies coming up, especially in Kenya. What's the status of the technical capacity in developing countries in Africa, and what strategies need to be put in place in order to witness an increase in the output of this precision data? I think, yeah, very specifically about what your experience in Kenya is.
Our experience has been, I think, as Derek has indicated, we're doing a lot of baseline work, recognizing that this is not necessarily the area that people would focus on. So we are still at the stage for seagrass science at the baseline, even understanding what species exist where. But as I look into the future, and he's asked, what type of capacities would we like to see? I'd like to see capacity growing for genetic type of studies, understanding the gene pools that we're dealing with, especially for resilience in climate. I think that's important. Experimental work, capacities built to be able to do more experimentation to understand let's say, using seagrass in ocean acidification type of work, if you change pH, what changes, how resilient are our systems. So experimental work is capacity I'd like to see built. And lastly, capacity to work with large data sets. We work with very small points of interest, I would say. I come to a patch and I make decisions on that point of interest. So I may make decisions on one seagrass and indicate that the hope, that what I've seen in one shoot is characteristic of the area. But I think we need to be able to collect, to use the baseline information and begin to use it to look at bigger data sets to be able to make decisions at a higher level and to feed into systems based on higher level thinking, I would say.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Leah and Yasmin, I wonder if you wanted to add anything from your experience. I guess what I'm interested in particularly is what areas need to still be filled in to ensure that we can reach a level where we've got the same kind of knowledge and progress as we have with mangroves. And I suppose the project for implementing a lot of ground truthing data and monitoring, I was wondering if you could add anything to those priorities.
You go ahead, Yasmin. You can go first.
So I would defer to the team we have here who worked on the monitoring work to kind of give a more detailed answer to this. But I would say in terms of just developing analysis capacity in Turkey with the project that we did with FFI and Bangor, even though we did the sampling work ourselves, we transferred the samples to the UK to be analyzed. And that was mainly because we don't have analysis capacity in country yet. So I think for us, it's a priority to have scientists who work in this field to learn the practices and be able to facilitate that process in the country in the future.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah. No, we also sent our samples to Bangor. So thank you, Hilary. Kennedy. Yeah, they very much agree. I think where I think there's also a lot to be done thinking regionally as well. The benefit of having such a kind of lab facilities and analysis facilities, in a region, even if it's not in a specific country, I think greatly speeds up, improves collaboration. It's been really exciting to watch there's a Western Indian Ocean mangrove expert network, and the collaboration and the knowledge sharing that goes on within that network is really inspiring. And I think there's a lot to be kind of learn from that. And I think also from the Kenya experience, the benefits of the collaboration of researchers and government authorities and government groups as well. I think that's kind of where things start to get really powerful, rather than researchers kind of like necessarily operating operating on their own with their obviously their scientific perspective, but that idea of that collaboration between, we've got some really fantastic regional universities here in Madagascar, and it's always exciting to see when they also kind of partner with the regional fisheries or regional forestry authorities with that link between science and policy.
Thanks, Richard.
Just to add into that I think the limited expertise in many parts of the world and the high costs of a lot of the carbon assessment work, particularly the sequestration rate, which is critical to developing carbon credits, it's unrealistic to expect that can be done at such high resolution. But what I think we need is better sort of data-informed models that present a seagrass typology as being particular, having a carbon range of X to Z, and so that that a fringing reef dominated seagrass meadow containing Thalassia and Cymodosia with a calcareous reef sediment has X amount, and then we know that an estuarine Zostra marina meadow has X amount, and because we're never going to get to the point where you can actually just go out and assess the sequestration rate of every single meadow, because actually then you've any meager carbon credit finance has probably just been spent. So it doesn't work, and I think we need to get to that better understanding, particularly of sequestration rates, and that the understanding that not all seagrass meadows are the same, but they sit into broad classifications. And from a tropical perspective, I've seen a lot of that in the Great Barrier Reef, where they created a really nice system of separating the seagrass meadows into different environmental typologies, and that can be probably done at a higher resolution within that, but that's what we need to get to know that sort of meadow is going to have that range of carbon sequestration rate, because it's that, and it's influenced by a river, and because I don't believe we can get to a level where you're sampling at such high rates, because I think that sequestration thing is a really big missing picture of where we're at in carbon credits for seagrass.
Leah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, Rich, and I do. So together with Plan Vivo, so the Plan Vivo Foundation, who administer the Plan Vivo standard, have recently heavily updated their standard, and in that process, we're also developing new methodologies to align with that standard. And one of the things that Blue Ventures is doing is supporting the development of a blue carbon specific Plan Vivo methodology, and the goal being very much to think about some of these kind of things. How can we simplify it? It's never going to be perfect. This kind of measurement is going to be out of reach for all but the very smallest of the very fewest of projects, and it would be really great, Rich, to include you in that conversation, and also anybody else on the call that's interested in inputting into that, and what could that look like, and what are the needs of some of the projects that are going on right now. So yeah, if anyone's interested in being involved in that process, please do reach out to me.
Thanks, Leah. Yeah, and I think it's a really important question to address, this kind of balance between getting projects going and getting very detailed, precise assessment. And I think there's often this slight conflict between getting perfect data and getting the projects done and implementing them in the carbon credit system. I think perhaps following on from the, firstly, how do we ensure that we have very accurate data that people can trust for those various different types of habitat all over the world? And I think from my own perspective, how do we ensure that how do we keep high integrity credits, which prioritise these other co-benefits and prioritise the social element and make sure they're implemented and not weakened by the kind of rush for credits? How do we make sure those are always incorporated? Perhaps Leah, again, just because you've had perhaps most experience with credits, if you could give your perhaps view on how we achieve high integrity credits while we have a chance to do carbon. It's a big question, for sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I can give that an answer, but I'm just not the audio is a little bit unclear. I'm really sorry, Dan. So are you saying, like, what does a high integrity credit look like? Is that the question, or? Yeah,
but apologies for the audio. What would that look like, and how do we achieve that? How do we ensure credits can be high integrity?
Yeah, just very quickly, because we are obviously running short of time. Yeah, I think it's a super interesting discussion. I think there also needs to be, so high integrity is really the central piece from both the, what is it a real emission, and high integrity also from a kind of a social and co-benefit side as well. There's some to be released in there, I think it's tomorrow or maybe on Saturday, a COP. There's going to be a kind of document that's summarizing, what does high integrity look like for carbon? What are some of the principles from both an investor perspective and also from a project development perspective? So it's be really interesting to follow that piece. But I think, it's really one thing we mustn't lose track of in this discussion is remembering, one of the purposes of climate carbon offsets and everything like that is to channel finance to conservation projects and restoration projects that are doing good. And there does need to be a balance between, the kind of the integrity from a carbon offset perspective and actually getting these projects going, getting them funded, and getting conservation and restoration going on the ground. So I think, the integrity discussion is of critical importance, but we also need to think pragmatically. That's my personal thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, I agree. Often it has to be the pragmatic side to get things done. I think as we approach the end of the discussion, I want to perhaps do a quick question around the audience. Sophie, what does the panel think are the top remaining priorities or most urgent next steps for implementing effective seagrass carbon credits? I think you've already touched on that point earlier. I'll start with Dr. Jacqueline. What would you say are the top priorities to progress this seagrass conservation and effective carbon credits?
Who is that question for? I'm not sure. I couldn't hear who you're asking.
It was to Dr. Jacqueline first.
Okay, sorry, we lost a bit of that. I think for me, the top priority would be visibility. We don't see seagrasses on our seascape. We are seagrass blind, so raising visibility for us is a priority. And then maybe secondly, working to do this cheaper. It does cost a great deal to run the process that we've run. Are there ways to not necessarily shortcut the process, but to get it right, but using a cheaper, making the journey easier and cheaper? Yeah.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Yasmin.
Yeah, I would echo that and add, I guess, education is very important, as well as supporting policy development in the Turkish context, not just for creating carbon markets and supporting carbon projects, but also marine conservation at large and MPA management, because all these are connected.
Thank you, Yasmin. Richard.
I totally endorse those previous statements around educating people I love that phrase, seagrass blindness. I think people are starting to open their eyes in particular countries around the world, but it's spatially restricted, massively spatially restricted, and in many parts of the world, people don't even understand what seagrass is relative to other habitats. People are still actually cutting and digging up seagrass because they think it's horrible under their feet at tourist resorts. We're still in a pretty dark place with seagrass in many parts of the world, even though there are glimmers of hope. So education has got to be absolute key to it. And actually, in terms of implementation, the other thing is that we can't shut our eyes to 50 or so years of conservation research that's showing that bottom-up, community-based processes are far more effective than top-down, and therefore the carbon credits have to be about the community. They have to be about engagement. They have to be about equity and the lives of people and respecting livelihoods, because otherwise it just doesn't work, and otherwise it's just frankly meaningless. And that's critical to making carbon credits work.
Well, I completely agree. It has to be equitable. Leo, any final thoughts in the final minute?
No, I think Rich did a fantastic job of summarising that last bit. Yeah, no, nothing to add to that. But a really interesting discussion.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I think I just want to send my very massive thanks to all the panelists for their really insightful views and experiences. And for the great discussion we've had online. So yeah, once again, thank you for joining us. And yeah, I look forward to exciting seagrass conservation and projects in the future. Thank you, everyone.